When I think of the ocean, I think of beaches, waves, relaxation, and recreation, a place to seek inspiration or inner peace. It is vast, unending, abundant, teeming with life. Or is it? Have we humans used up the ocean? We're so tiny compared to the ocean. How could we possibly even impact the ocean? And what does the ocean have to do with our health? Let's take a look. The ocean is a home and food source for many fish, mammals, plants, birds, and more. More than 3 billion people depend on wild-caught and farmed seafood as their primary source of food. So you have the 3 billion people who need seafood and the rest of the planet that just wants to eat seafood. You can imagine that a fishing pole or a small fishing net is not enough. Overfishing is the harvesting of wildlife from the sea at rates too high for species to replace themselves. Orange roughy, Chilean sea bass, and bluefin tuna have all fallen victim to humanity's insatiable appetite. The United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization estimates that 85% of marine fish stocks are either fully exploited or overfished. Large ocean fish have been reduced to 10% of their pre-industrial population. That hasn't stopped us though. Big industrial fishing fleets can fish deeper in the ocean and farther down the food chain. They have sophisticated methods and technologies for finding, extracting, and processing their target fish or shellfish. This disrupts the balance of marine ecosystems, disrupts the interactions among fish and shellfish, and with their environment that disrupts the food chain. More on the early days of overfishing off of Cape Cod in this week's newsletter 7410 Expanded. It's free and easy to subscribe. Okay, back to overfishing. It's not just the target fish and shellfish that are overfished. Trawling, where boats pull massive nets behind them in the water, pulls in more than just shrimp and bluefin tuna. It captures just about anything in its path, even coral reefs. Sea turtles, dolphins, seabirds, sharks, and other animals are caught by these nets only to be thrown back into the sea dead. Another way we impact the ocean is through pollution. A quick side note, I talk about one ocean throughout this video. There is one global ocean that covers 71% of Earth, but it can be divided into geographically distinct regions that are the 5 named oceans. So we humans have polluted the oceans, all 5 named oceans, in many, many ways. We have treated the ocean like a garbage dump for everything from plastics to pesticides to toxic metals. But it's even more complex than that, with manufactured chemicals, oil spills, fertilizers, and sewage added in. How about plastic alone? About 70 to 80% of the plastic in the ocean comes from land, through rivers, runoff, even direct dumping. The other 20 to 30% comes from fishing nets, lines, ropes, and abandoned vessels. 640,000 tons of nets, lines, pots, and traps are dumped or lost in the ocean every year. That's like dumping 50,000 double-decker buses in the ocean every year. You can imagine how easy it is for marine wildlife to get caught up in the fishing gear, like 300 endangered sea turtles found dead entangled in fishing nets off the Mexican coast in 2018. To make it even worse, the plastics break down into microscopic pieces that contain toxic chemicals. These chemicals made the plastic flexible or colorful or waterproof. More on their impact on our health in a moment. Because plastic waste is just the tip of the iceberg, take a look at this chart. Number 2 is oil spills. There are tiny marine organisms, phytoplankton, in the ocean that produce oxygen. The smallest species of phytoplankton produce up to 20% of all oxygen on Earth. Petroleum pollutants from oil spills threaten the marine microorganisms by reducing their capacity for photosynthesis. When there is a major oil spill, the impact can be huge. The crazy thing about crude oil is that it's made up of thousands of chemical compounds. There are also heavy metals in the oil that can accumulate in the food chain. Even oysters ingest heavy metals. Number 3 is mercury. There's a lot of mercury in the ocean, mostly because of coal burning in homes and industry. Another source is gold mining because it's used to dissolve gold from the ore. Number 4 is manufactured chemicals. There is a group of chemicals called PFAS and known as forever chemicals that have been used for over 50 years in things like cosmetics, shampoo, water repellent coatings for nonstick cookware, and food packaging. adhesives, and firefighting foams, among others. As the PFAS-containing products are washed down drains and thrown in landfills, PFAS chemicals become widespread in the environment and the aquatic ecosystems. Number 5 is pesticides. Only a small fraction of pesticides makes it to the rivers, but once they do, they end up in the ocean. Even a tiny amount of pesticides has a negative impact on marine and freshwater food chains and coral reefs. Number 6 is nutrients. Coastal pollution from industrial waste, agricultural runoff from the meat industry, pesticides, and sewage increases the frequency of harmful algal blooms, which deplete the area of oxygen. Fish and marine life can't survive in these dead zones. This is a map of dead zones in the Gulf of Mexico in July 2021. The whole area is over 6,000 square miles. The maroon shows areas with an almost complete lack of oxygen. And this leads us to climate change. The ocean is at the heart of the Earth's climate system. The health of the ocean will ultimately determine the survival of humankind on Earth. Peter Thompson, UN Special Envoy for the Ocean, said the ocean plays a fundamental planetary role in mitigating the effects of climate change through its absorption of heat and carbon. This service alone makes the healthy functioning of the ocean's ecosystems critical to all humans. So if the ocean is that critical, how's it doing? Over 90% of global warming is occurring in the ocean. You can see on this chart how much of its internal heat has increased since 1960. A zettajoule is equivalent to 1 sextillion joules. It's so big it has 21 zeros after it. For perspective, the ocean has absorbed more than 8 times the amount of energy humans have used in that same time for cooking, electricity, industry, heating, etc. Another way to think about it, the ocean is absorbing extra energy at a rate equivalent to 5 Hiroshima bombs a second. This amount of heat has consequences. Heat stored in the ocean causes the water to expand, which raises the sea level. About a third to a half of global sea level rise is thought to be caused by ocean heat. The coastal areas are important not just because 1/3 of the world's population lives there, but the coastal areas provide huge benefits like food production, water filtration, preservation of biodiversity, shoreline protection, storm buffering, sediment retention, nutrient cycling, and carbon sequestration. Rising ocean temperatures are the leading cause of coral bleaching. That's a serious threat to the biodiversity and health of coral reef ecosystems. According to the EPA, they cover less than 0.1% of the ocean floor, yet more than a quarter of all marine life, including over 4,000 species of fish, are dependent on coral reefs at some point in their life cycle. In July 2023, corals in the Florida Keys began bleaching, and as the temperatures rose to their highest levels, some of the corals died immediately. The whole Caribbean experienced a basin-wide bleaching event. Climate change hasn't just impacted the ocean's temperature, but it is also altering the chemistry of the ocean. About 30% of the carbon emitted by burning fossil fuels has been absorbed into the ocean. This has increased the acidity of the ocean by about 25% since before the Industrial Revolution, more than any other time within the last 2 million years, and affected the balance of minerals in the water. This harms marine organisms like corals, clams, oysters, and some plankton, and their ability to build shells and skeletons. This also harms smaller organisms sensitive to acidity and all the way up the food chain. Ocean currents are slowing down due to the increasing heat. These ocean currents regulate the Earth's climate and distribution of carbon, oxygen, and nutrients around the world. Currents have slowed almost 30% around Antarctica since the mid-1990s. Sea ice is in decline, which accelerates more global warming. Sea ice in the polar regions in 2023 was lower than any year on record. That only touches the surface of the impact of climate change on the ocean. Hopefully, that's enough to make you wonder why we do it. That is, overfishing, pollution, and climate change. Have you noticed a similarity between how we treat the Earth and how we treat our bodies? We act as if there are endless resources, whether from the Earth or our bodies. We continue to overfish, even though we know the fish populations can't keep up. We do the same thing to our bodies. We work long hours under lots of stress and tension, realizing that it's taking a toll on our bodies because who has time to eat healthy, exercise, enjoy life, and get enough sleep? Instead, we eat fast food for lunch because we need more time to work. skip exercise, and hope the walk to the car is enough. Forget sleep. We try to squeeze more and more into our days as we try to squeeze more and more out of the planet. Then, as we pollute our oceans, so we pollute ourselves. Mercury, PCBs, pesticides, manufactured chemicals, sewage, manure, fertilizer, and plastic. What don't we throw into the ocean? And apparently that's okay for our bodies too. Ultra-processed foodstuffs have chemicals that we don't completely understand and can't pronounce, yet we continue to shovel these into our bodies. Meanwhile, through climate change, we have impacted the health of the ocean and threatened our own existence. This makes no sense. How can we be so heedless about the planet, our bodies and brains, not to mention all the other species that we have brought to extinction or treat cruelly? I think heedless is right. That's showing a reckless lack of care or attention. Anyway, if you have thoughts, let me know in the comments below. So why did my husband and I stop eating fish and seafood? Many dietary guidelines and organizations like the American Heart Association recommend eating fish twice a week, especially for the omega-3 fats they contain. Our original reason was that our health did not get any better when we were pescatarians. That is, we had stopped eating meat, but still ate seafood and consumed dairy products like milk and cheese. We didn't lose weight. Our cholesterol didn't decrease. In fact, my husband was pre-diabetic. Once we stopped eating fish and consuming dairy products, his cholesterol level dropped. We each lost about 20 pounds. Our blood pressure dropped, and my husband was no longer pre-diabetic. The problem is that fish fat is not much different than chicken fat, turkey fat, beef fat, pork fat, or dairy fat. Fish contain saturated fat and cholesterol. Yes, they also contain omega-3 fats, but for most fish, 15 to 30% is saturated fat, and most of the rest are other types of fat that provide no health benefits at all. Instead, the main effect is weight gain, which is what we found. Later on, we learned about overfishing, pollution, and climate change. We know there are not enough fish for everyone. Why not leave fish for the people that actually depend on fish to survive? That should be reason enough. But there are more. In addition to saturated fat, cholesterol, and humanitarian reasons, you should know the consequences of ocean pollutants on your health. In each of these cases, fish take in harmful pollutants from the water and the food they eat. Microplastics. When humans eat seafood contaminated with these materials, we ingest millions of microplastic particles and the many chemicals they carry. Virtually all of us have microplastics in our bodies today. We don't even know how much harm they can cause. But we do know what the chemicals can do. The toxic chemicals in microplastics include carcinogens, neurotoxins, and endocrine disruptors, chemicals that interfere with hormones and can cause cancer, birth defects, and reduced fertility. Oil spills. Chemicals in crude oil can cause respiratory problems as well as temporary central nervous system troubles. Even cancers have been linked at high exposure levels. Oil can also cause dermatitis and other skin infections. And of course, chemicals and heavy metals accumulate in smaller fish that are eaten by larger fish, which we then eat. Mercury. Mercury can accumulate to high levels in predatory fish like tuna and swordfish. For infants in the womb, exposure can damage developing brains, increasing risks for autism, ADHD, and other learning disorders. For adults, exposure to mercury increases risks for heart disease and dementia. Manufactured chemicals, PFAS, have been linked to immunological disorders, endocrine, developmental, reproductive, and neurological disruption, and increased risk of bladder, liver, kidney, and testicular cancer. Pesticides. Since pesticides are specifically designed to have biological effects, even low doses can affect living organisms. Pesticides contribute to global declines in fish stocks and can also reduce human fertility. High levels of PCBs can harm the brain and nervous system. PCBs can also cause cancer and other harmful effects. Nutrients. Dead zones kill fish and marine life, but the algal blooms are also harmful. These blooms produce powerful toxins that accumulate in any fish and shellfish that survive. When eaten, these toxins can cause dementia, amnesia, paralysis, and even rapid death. When inhaled, they can cause asthma. If you haven't given up seafood yet, you're a braver person than me. But there is one last reason, maybe the most important one. We know now that fish are sentient and emotional beings. They can feel pain in the same way that we do. Scientific researchers have gathered solid empirical data. Fish even develop cultural traditions and can recognize themselves and others. Whenever I'm tempted to eat fish, this is the reason that matters the most to me now. The ocean seems so big and unchangeable. What can we do as individuals to protect the ocean? We can advocate for phasing out fossil fuels. We can stop eating meat to reduce animal agriculture with its greenhouse gas emissions and nutrient runoff. We can stop eating seafood to reduce overfishing and stop eating our own pollution. You don't have to eat fish or take a fish oil pill for omega-3 fatty acids. You can easily find an algal oil like this one made from marine algae. Algae does not absorb the pollutants we have put in the ocean. We can advocate for better controls to prevent all pollutants from flowing into the ocean. We can give respect and compassion to non-human animals, including fish and other marine wildlife, and this magnificent blue planet. Hey, we really do appreciate your support. Please like, share, and subscribe for more. Let's reverse the damage we've done to the ocean and our bodies. And remember to take it one day at a time until it's 7 days a week, forever 10.